I received an opportunity to exhibit my art in a gallery where it will be viewed by potentially hundreds of people, all of which are potential buyers. But there's a slight problem. I need at least 12 artworks, and how many do I already have? 0. They asked me if I could send them some of my work, and I was like, sure, no problem. So now I have to make some artworks fast, because I don't want to leave them hanging, potentially missing the opportunity. Moreover, it is unclear how much time I have to complete all of them, meaning that the moment I send them some of my work, it could be any number of days before they say, alright, looks good, come by tomorrow and we'll start hanging them up. So how did I find myself in this neat little situation? Well, I'd say it's time for a backstory. The backstory. So I've been seeing the same chiropractor, Monique, for about 3 years now. Last summer, during one of our sessions, we were talking about our creative pursuits, and I told her that I was working on this new idea for a small creative business. The idea was simple: tiny artworks housed inside regular frames. The name was even simpler: 1% art, 99% frame. Her reaction was something like, "That's fucking cool! I'd like to commission a piece, and I want the subject to be Tinkerbell." But it so happened to be that our next session would be around her birthday. So I said, you know what? I will make it a birthday gift. So I started working on this Tinkerbell, which, by the way, was the most fun I had working on a project in what felt like a decade. I finished the artwork, shot some pictures, wrapped it, and brought it with me to the practice where we had our sessions. I came in with this huge package, so of course the receptionist was like, "What the fuck is that?" I explained what it was and who it was for, and then she said something like this: "Our practice is full with artworks made by our clients. If you have at least 12 artworks ready, you could display them here for a few months." So, of course, I was like, fuck yes, I will. And then she said, if you can show us about 5 artworks of yours so we can get a sense of your style, we can decide if they fit our practice. So, it must fit the overall style of the practice, but that shouldn't be a problem. Why? Well, because she continued with this. We once gave a client permission to exhibit his work here, and it happened to consist of hyenas devouring other animals. Suffice to say, we got many complaints from our clients. So as long as I'm staying away from cruelty and violence, should be okay. Alright, so what's the plan? The plan. Mandalas. But before you click away, let me explain why this is the most perfect subject for this project. Because my 1% art, 99% frame concept creates another layer that takes this connection to a whole other level. How? Let me explain it to you while I start working on the first artwork for this project, because remember, the clock is ticking. The plan still. First, the tiny mandala in the fast frame mirrors the chiropractic philosophy itself. The chiropractor's precise and small adjustments are like the tiny mandala, while the effect they have on the entire body is like the expensive frame. Second, all that empty space becomes therapeutic. It's not demanding attention or overwhelming the senses, perfect in an environment where people might be experiencing pain or tension. It also gives the eye somewhere to rest, much like how adjustments give the body relief. And third, it reinforces the less is more principle. Effective chiropractic isn't about doing more, it's about precise intervention in the right spot. The mandala doesn't need to be huge to have impact, just like an adjustment doesn't need to be dramatic to be effective. And then there are some practical benefits to creating mandalas. I can create a mandala much faster than, let's say, a Tinkerbell, because the work is much more intuitive and a lot more forgiving when you're not working with exact proportions and scales. If, for example, I would have placed Tinkerbell's eye only a millimeter too low, she would have looked mentally challenged and I would have had to start all over again. But make a slight error in an organic mandala and it just becomes a new direction instead of a screw up. And that is exactly how I created this first mandala. I just went in with no plan and no direction. Perhaps that's also why it turned out more like a freehand doodle than a mandala. Also, what's up with all these eyes that started to pop up out of nowhere? It somehow became a thing. But I can already hear you thinking, you're just taking the easy way out. There's no growth when you stay in your comfort zone. Where's the challenge? You're just playing it safe. Okay, yes, fine. Its first mandala was indeed me playing it safe. But that is only because from now on I will explore a new direction for every subsequent mandala. This could be a technique I haven't tried out, working with different writing materials, or something else entirely. So, with that being said, what will I do for a second mandala? Well, mandala is Sanskrit for circle, so I thought it would be fitting to create one that purely consists of, well, circles. Also, I think it's about time that I tell you the story of how this tiny artwork concept came to be. Another freaking backstory. This whole idea of drawing super tiny came about 8 years ago when I was in my second year of product design. I found a 005 Pigma Micron fine liner, meaning that the tip is only 0.2mm, and my first thought was, I wonder how small I can draw with this. So, challenge accepted, and I started drawing all these random things, primarily in the same doodle style as the first mandala. This excitement lasted for about 2 months, and the fine liners, along with the doodles, retreated to the back of a random drawer. Fast forward to 7 years later, and I randomly stumbled upon some of the doodles I made back then. Feeling nostalgic, I wrote a newsletter about it before deciding to throw them back into that drawer. But before that moment came, an idea popped into my head. One that got me all excited again about these tiny drawings. And this idea you're seeing in action right now. With these first 2 mandalas ready, along with the Tinkerbell, I decided that it would be enough to send to the practice. About an hour later, I received a reply which said, "We'll get back to you." So, I guess we just continue then? While assembling the first 2 artworks, I noticed that I found it somewhat of a pity to give the artwork such a clear border through the use of the mat. So I decided to change the formula a bit for the next 2 to 3 artworks. I will make the inner dimensions of the mat slightly larger than the dimensions of the artworks. Also, I will make the artworks themselves circular in design so they actually start to look like mandalas. So, what will I do to create the third artwork? Dots. I will use dots. I started working on one, but it immediately felt like it wasn't going in the right direction, so I flipped the canvas and started over. What I discovered about working with this technique is that from up close it looks like I'm constantly making mistakes, but then when I zoom out, it looks amazing. You can create this beautiful effect by playing around with the density of the dots, which from a distance creates the illusion of various shades of grey. Another interesting effect is that it looks like it's printed out instead of drawn. Definitely my favorite so far. Also, I noticed that it can be quite difficult to get an idea on the actual size of these artworks, so here's a banana for scale. I feel like one of the 12 mandalas should just be a standard one in terms of design, but you know what these look like. So instead of showing you the drawing process, let us focus on everything but the drawing process for a minute. Let me take you through the process of creating a 1% art, 99% frame artwork. The concept. It all starts with picking out a frame. These I collect through local thrift shops and online secondhand platforms. I prefer to collect wooden frames with a glass panel. Not only does this add protection, it also increases the perceived overall quality. Some frames need heavy sanding, others don't need sanding at all, like the one I use for the dotted mandala for example. But most frames do, and it prepares them for the next step, which is painting the frames. I use a paint based on natural oil and wax from a brand called Osmo. The frame and the mat are often worked on simultaneously. The latter I create using recycled cardboard. I locate the center and trace the dimensions for the cutout on the inside, which I then cut out using a 45-degree mat cutter. The mats are painted white using an eco-friendly white gesso from Pebeo with a roller that I wash and reuse after each layer. For my canvas, I use thick recycled paper by Clairefontaine, and of course you already know what I use as my drawing medium. But besides the fine liners, I like to try out different mediums, hence the challenge I set out for myself for this project. Speaking of challenges, I wanted to find a way to attach the artwork to the mats while still being able to easily remove them. That's why I came up with using paper triangles. These I make with CO2 neutral paper made from sugarcane waste, hence the color. I then attach them to the back of the mat using double-sided tape. This way they can be safely removed if ever needed. For most artworks I need to add an extra layer between the art and the back of the frame. The reason for this is that otherwise there would be too much space between the mat and the artwork. Then all that is left is assembling, which leaves you with a disproportionate artwork that's unrecognizable for people with bad eyesight. Now that we've basically covered everything there is to cover, it is time to go a little more rapidly through each subsequent artwork. The idea for this next artwork came to me through another creative pursuit of mine, which is world building. In my next video, I will dive deeper into why world building is the ultimate tool for overcoming creative block. But for now, we will create a fantasy city map mandala.
Wait, what?
When we think of a mandala, we all kind of have the same image in mind, right? But when you look at the definition, it says circular geometric design or something. This could be interpreted in a myriad of ways, and one of those ways is a fictional city map. The first thing I did wasn't sketching, it was research. I collected various images on Pinterest and watched multiple videos on how to create a map like this. And then I continued with sketching. By the way, I didn't base my design on any preconceived image or idea. The only ideas I had was that the city should be, of course, circular. It should be next to a sea, and there should be lots of forest surrounding it. If I felt content with a certain part of the sketch, I would trace it with fine liner. And once that was done, it was time for the fun part. Coloring. This is the step where everything starts to come alive. I used more than 30 different colors. This is because every little element got at least a base color, a shadow color, and a highlight color, and often more than one. What I love about this concept is that it enables you to add in all these little details that only reveal themselves when you look long enough. For example, I've scattered all these colored squares throughout the city that resemble market stalls. There are multiple little parks and gardens, and there's a ruin in the bottom right of the artwork. In the opposite corner, there's a castle on a cliff, and there are a couple dirt roads that branch off of main roads that lead to farms outside of the city. The central building is like a keep, and the other major building is a church or cathedral located on the cliff. Through the use of shadows, I've tried to express the size of these buildings. Definitely still room for improvement, but this was again such a fun artwork to work on. One of the first frames I collected when this concept was still fresh was this beautiful golden frame. And when I started this project, I knew that I just had to use it. But also that the artwork that would go in this frame should match with the frame itself. In other words, we'll be taking early modern European elements and throwing them into the Eastern art style that is mandalas.
Early modern European mandala, I guess.
But before we can begin with the artwork, we have to take a look at the frame first, because someone, probably its maker, has passionately stapled a thick sheet of cardboard to the back of the frame. Seeing no proper way to remove this, I decided that I would just cut it away with a Stanley knife after taking off the suspension, of course. Peeling away this sheet revealed that the artwork inside was attached to it, and the mat that was used was fixed on a rows of little nails. Not the best method, but it's the method that we've got, so we'll just have to work with it. But we'll set the frame aside for now and focus on creating the artwork first. So why early modern European and not just Renaissance or Baroque, for example? Because I honestly wouldn't be able to differentiate between the two. I just wanted it to match the style of the frame. So I searched for design elements from this period for inspiration, and almost all the results feature these organic floral patterns. It occurred to me that making a tiny mandala in this style would quickly result in one chaotic mess. That's when I thought of adding in these straight lines as if capturing this inner part inside of a frame. Of course, it still wasn't close to finished, so I continued with the floral patterns. I finished one whole quarter of the artwork first before copying this design over to the remaining quarters. With this done as well, I still felt like the artwork was still a little bit too small, so then the thought came, why don't just add another frame to it? But just adding a square frame again wouldn't do it justice. So I came up with this design, and that honestly felt like a big improvement. Initially, I planned on keeping this artwork black and white, but it just felt so chaotic from a small distance that I eventually decided otherwise. And what other color to use than gold? So I started filling all the empty spaces with gold and gave the frames this light brown color. Once you start coloring, you just have to go all the way. But I felt like the contrast should be kept minimal, hence why I picked these soft green and yellow tones. Except, of course, for the blue color in the center. Gotta add a little gem to a drawing like this. I'm happy that I decided to add color, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Now, we still have this frame to deal with. I first started bending all the nails in order to remove the glass panel, but then I realized that this could only be done by removing them completely. Why remove the glass to begin with? For cleaning. Absolutely necessary with old frames like these. The nails I removed couldn't be used again because I had bent them. Luckily, I had nails in almost the same size. A light press so that the mats are sure to never shift again, and done. I had now reached the halfway point, and still I hadn't heard back from the practice. I really started to fear losing this opportunity to exhibit my work. It was time to get my foot in the door, and there was one person who could help me with that. So I texted my chiropractor Monique for help, explaining this whole situation. A day later, I was invited to the practice on an off day, where the same receptionist that offered me the opportunity let me in. And this is what she told me. We usually rotate the art every 3 months, but the clients and us love the current art so much that it has been hanging here for 5 months now. In other words, whenever you have all 12 artworks ready, hit me up. I'll make sure the current art will be removed and give you the key so you can hang your work up over the weekend. Guys, we made it. So now that there's no deadline looming on the horizon anymore, we will just take it easy, right?
Nope.
Although that is great news, there is something else at play here.
Another backstory? Seriously?
About 4 months ago, my freelance work organically fell away. Any sane person would have looked for a new job.
Not this guy.
Instead, I decided to go all in on YouTube, living off my buffer until it runs out, which is soon. And the more time I invest in YouTube, the sooner I'll reach the point of monetization. So we will not take it easy, we will continue to make some cool fucking artworks.
I never thought he would layer mandala without using black.
I initially thought that these really fine liners came only in black, but then I found there are 5 more colors in this size. Granted, these are the 005 fine liners and not the 003 I've been using so far, meaning that the tip is slightly bigger. Still, these should be small enough to create some tiny artworks with. My plan was to create 4 distinct layers, each with a single color and each interacting with the others. Green would be for straight lines, red would be for lines that bend, blue would be for angular shapes, and purple would be for circular shapes. But as I made progress on this artwork, I started to bend the rules a little bit. I felt like red was a bit underrepresented, so I used it to add little dots of red inside the purple circles. The biggest blue diamond shapes were too empty, but filling them with more blue felt like making the whole piece too blue, so I used green. But it still felt too empty, so I added another red spiral. And fuck it, let's just add in a little more blue, why not? I like this concept of using colors and no black. Might do one eventually with even more colors. A little while ago I was in this concept store which was kinda random. They sold household products, herbs for cooking, chocolate, and art supplies. Like this watercolor paint set consisting only of 6 bluish colors. And of course, I just had to use it for this project. From the moment I got the idea for this next mandala, I knew that I had found a purpose for these watercolors.
Stained glass window mandala.
I can't really put my finger on why stained glass and watercolor felt like such a perfect match. Maybe it's because of the glossy finish these watercolors have. Or perhaps it has to do with the specific approach that I had in mind. You see, my plan was to first make a layer using the watercolors. This layer would act as the stained glass panels, which will become clear in just a second. Also, I decided to sprinkle in some gold-colored particles to give it even more of a defined aesthetic. It felt appropriate seeing that circular stained glass windows are mostly found inside churches and cathedrals. With the watercolor fully dried, it was time to start drawing some shapes with my trusty fine liner. I wanted to lean into that stained glass cathedral window aesthetic a bit. This also meant using more black by coloring in certain sections instead of just drawing lines. Now, I have to be honest with you. With almost every artistic decision I made, I felt like I was screwing up the artwork more and more. When I was about halfway, I felt like it was only getting worse. But starting over wasn't an option anymore at this point, so I just doubled down and accepted every little mistake as a valuable part of the process. It was only when I started filling in the outside with black that I started to feel content with the design again. And when I finally saw it in its proper context, I knew that I just created another favorite. So far, this whole project has been quite comfortable. Perhaps a little too comfortable. It's good for you to challenge yourself every now and then, to seek out discomfort. So for the remaining 4 artworks, I decided to give myself a deadline. I reached out to the practice, telling them that I would be ready to hang up my work by the end of April. That is 3 weeks from now. 4 artworks, 3 weeks time. seems about plenty of time, right? That would have been the case if it was the only thing I needed to do in that time frame. However, not only am I making these artworks in styles and with techniques that I've never used, I also have to write out the script, plan the next steps, film everything, edit everything. Moreover, I just received the keys to my own place, and let me tell you, this place needs a lot of work. The garden alone demands so much attention because a number of major interventions are needed before everything starts to bloom, which is now. So with that said, it's time to stop yapping and start being productive.
Finally, this guy is making some sense.
Introduce the fucking mandala then, you moron!
3D Mandala.
Excuse my tardy assistant. If you didn't catch that, this will be, or at least an attempt to, a 3D mandala. This will be the only one where I'll start on the outside and move my way to the center. It felt like the most logical approach because each layer will essentially sit below the layer above it, creating the experience of looking through a tunnel, albeit a very shallow one. This effect will only start to make sense once I start adding in shadow. But let us first get all these layers done, of which I ended with 6 in total. It was around this time that I realized that I'd created a relatively big artwork. I like to think that my skill is in scale, and this scale had become quite average. So in order to introduce more tiny details, I started adding in these little symbols on each layer. I've always been interested in fictional written languages, so this was a good excuse to finally do something with that. Now, coloring in the layers proved to be a real challenge. I had to create 6 shades of grey using 2 different pencils. I had to reduce some layers in order to get the color difference per layer just right, but in the end, I think I succeeded. I decided on the direction of my invisible light source and started adding in shadow. Funny thing is that I did the line work from the outside to inside, the coloring of the layers from inside to outside, and the shading again from outside to inside. It took some touching up to get it just right, but in the end I think I did a decent job on this one. What do you guys think? When the receptionist gave me the green light for this project, I took the opportunity to take some photos of each room. And since then, something has been bugging me a little. You see, this here is the photo I took from the entrance hall. As you can see, there's quite a big canvas on the wall here from the previous artist. This was a deliberate choice because the wall behind this canvas is full of protruding nails and rough patches. Of course, they don't want that to be visible, so the receptionist asked me if I had an artwork in roughly the same size. I hadn't. So since then, I've been looking for frames of that size, but to no avail. Until 2 days ago. And the frame that I found is just perfect. Here, let me show you. So you see, the cardboard I've been using to make my mats is 70 centimeters wide and 1 meter tall. And then the frame that I found, which has a sticker on the back, says that it's 70 by 100. So that would mean, of course, that this mat perfectly fits the fucking frame. Amazing! But of course, seeing the size and the prominent place of this frame, it should contain an exceptional artwork. There are only 3 more artworks to go, so the choices are limited. Still, I think I have the right theme for this one.
The Genesis Mandala.
Let me try to explain the concept of this mandala, of which essentially there are 2. The first one is the scale increases the further you'll get from the center. The second one is trying to catch the essence of this world through a tiny mandala. That meant dedicating a layer to the sea as it makes up most of the Earth's surface and is fundamental to life. And on top of that sea, I created the surface of the Earth, as it were. Most of it I dedicated to nature landscapes, but of course I also added in some man-made structures, like this medieval city, but also a futuristic city for contrast. So why Genesis? Genesis means origin or creation, and as you just saw, I made the center of this piece a tiny heart. Not just as a fun little detail, but because all of life is built upon and built out of love. It's the foundation of life. Perhaps it's even the origin of life. Who knows? What I do know is that something went terribly wrong when I was about halfway in creating this artwork. So I saw this bee in my room, so I thought, let me open up a window for him so he can get out. Then I took a step, then I stood on the fucking glass from... God fucking damn it. For my biggest frame, the glass panel for my biggest frame on the artwork I'm working on right now. So fuck. I will look for another glass panel of this size, maybe an acrylic one. see if I can find something. I needed that glass panel. So I went online to search for one, and then about 2 days later... Guys, I couldn't help myself, so I bought a new frame. As you can see, it's the same size as the old frame. And we're just gonna take out the glass panel and put it in the old frame. Because this frame, first off, it's aluminium, and it's not black. So fuck that frame, take out the glass panel, put it in the other frame, and we have the complete fucking thing. Was it expensive? Yes. Was it worth it? Hell yes. How expensive was it? Why don't you mind your own fucking business, you nosy little Back to the artwork. I could tell you about coloring techniques that I used or design choices, but I'd like to take it in a different direction. You see, during the making of this artwork, something just clicked. When I first came up with this tiny artwork concept, it was my goal to create artworks where there are more things to discover the longer you look at it. And I feel like this is the first artwork I've made that actually adheres to that goal. With most of my mandalas, every quarter of the artwork is the same as the others. But with this one, there's something new to see on every square centimeter. There are animals scattered about. There's even a UFO abducting a man. The only thing that didn't really come out right is the northern lights on this side of the artwork. I was a little afraid of fucking up the sky by coloring it in, but man, am I glad that I did, because it made it look so much better. And not just the sky, I'm talking about the piece as a whole. It's funny how this artwork was meant to be displayed in that entrance hall from the start, because I definitely would have chosen this piece for that spot if it still had been undecided.
Asymmetrical Mandala.
Right off the bat, I forgot to press record when I started this artwork, and I unknowingly fucked up every shot by having my hair block the lens. It seems like I found myself an artwork that's camera shy. Anyway, I wanted to do at least one mandala that didn't follow the mandala rule of symmetry, and for which I'd use these colored fine liners. I thought that it would feel liberating to not have to make everything symmetrical. You see me making this mandala now as if this was my first try, and for all my previous mandalas that was indeed the case. But these are the attempts and little sketches that I made before I found a direction worth going in. So the increase in freedom also brought an increase in chaos. But that chaos fell away the moment I introduced that first colored outline. And lastly, I tend to use circular patterns and designs in my mandalas, so I deliberately created the outer layer of squares and rectangles. I somehow can't seem to take my eyes away from this artwork. There's a certain interplay between the colors and the shapes that makes it really dynamic. We have arrived at the very last artwork. But before I reveal the theme, I'll have to give you some context. Here you see another photo of an artwork location in the practice. As you can see, this one is located on the wall at the stairwell. This is all well and good, unless your concept is creating tiny artworks that require you almost touching your nose against it in order to see it. And in a stairwell, at least this one, that's not really possible. So, how to fix this? With binoculars. Of course, you then attach it to a theme that fits that setting. Well, almost fits that setting. Binoculars are mostly used for things like bird watching, and I will not be creating a bird mandala. Although that sounds pretty interesting, actually. But no, instead of binoculars, a telescope would have been more fitting, because the theme for this artwork will be the moon. Or actually, that will be the subject. The theme will be
Inverted Mandala.
I got myself this black paper from Clairefontaine, but what will I use as my writing medium? I eventually settled for using a pen holder with the finest of nibs and white gouache for my ink. I have zero experience with any of these things, so let's see how this goes. I didn't want to start with the moon, aka the mandala, so instead I started with the background, which of course had to be a star-filled sky. And these stars are just white dots. Lots of them. Only then was it time to start with the mandala. And I gotta say, my patience was really put to the test with this one. These crow quills seem to have a life of their own. It's as if it randomly chose a value between no ink and lots of ink with every line that I made. It made me appreciate the consistency of my fine liners even more. One thing to note, during assembly, flakes of old paint from the frame decided they wanted to become part of the experience as well. There's no way of removing them because this was another frame where everything is fixed with nails. I guess I'll just have to accept it. Guys, we've made it. We're inside the practice now, ready to hang up these bad boys. But before we do that, there's one more thing I'd like to show you. I've made these cards that will go on the wall beside each artwork. It displays the name of the artwork, the price, some info, my contacts, and lastly, this QR code. Scanning it takes you to my landing page on which you'll find links to all my socials. It also links to my most recent video, which soon will be the video you're watching right now. Alright, I'm going to hang everything up now. Oh, one last thing. I really want to thank you for making it this far into the video. I hope it has been entertaining, but why stop at entertainment? If you are a creator, like myself, then there are a couple of things I'd like you to take away from this video. Say yes to an opportunity that excites you, even if your rational mind says no. When this opportunity presented itself, I had just one artwork to show, which was in a style I knew I wouldn't soon return to. I then chose a theme I had practically no experience with, and even chose to explore new styles and techniques for each artwork, meaning that I couldn't rely on experience at all. In short, I was working with a high level of uncertainty along with the risk of the artworks turning out like trash. So why did I accept it? The simple answer is, it excited me. When you learn to trust to follow your excitement, instead of that inner voice that critiques your capabilities and constantly tells you what you can't do, your life suddenly starts to become really interesting. The side effect is realizing that you can do more than you thought yourself capable. So fuck your inner critique, just follow your excitement. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll stop feeling doubt or fear though. But that brings you to the next point, stick with it, even when you feel like you're screwing it up. During the making process of 4 or 5 of these mandalas, I felt like I was just fucking it up with every little decision that I made. But once I took a step back and looked at the finished artwork, I noticed that it wasn't half as bad as I thought, which is still an understatement. And then there were some artworks where the reverse was true. Seeing the end result and noticing the dissatisfaction while the making process felt like creating a masterpiece. If that happens to you, I'd just like to say, you will always be your biggest critic. You, as the artist, might feel like the work you just created is not on your usual level. And not only that, you fear that everyone else will look at it in the same way. But they never do, and they never will. They won't see the flaws and the imperfections. They will see a beauty that your eyes are failing to perceive. Let yourself grow as an artist by actively looking for your edge. It means that, in order to experience growth, you should aim to work at the intersection of challenge and skill. Difficult enough to feel challenging, but still doable given your current skill set. This in turn increases your skill, which lets you take on harder challenges. It's also the sweet spot for getting into a flow state. This is why I challenge myself to try different techniques and approaches for each artwork. And lastly, don't take yourself or your work too seriously. Lighten up, have fun, try out something new and fail and try again. The only reason you should ever need to do something is because it makes you happy. For the past 2 months, this project has kinda taken over my life. And now that it's completed, it's time to move on to the next one. So if you like fun and quirky creative projects like this one, I'd encourage you to subscribe, because I will be doing a lot more of these. For now though, you could watch this video in which I made a cabinet from driftwood. And if you're also interested in philosophy and self-development just like me, you could watch this video in which I tell my story from depression to unlimited creativity. Thank you again for sticking with me so far, and I'll see you in the next one.